Thank you very much. It's great to be back at ASI. I haven't been for a few years, and it's good to see so many familiar faces, albeit a few of them have got a little bit older, I suspect, like myself, over the decade or so since I've been coming. And getting a little bit older is probably a good introduction to this idea of post-retirement, because you go back 10 or 15 years ago and no one thought about post-retirement question for super. It was all about how can you grow the money, how can you grow it faster, and what are the different options you offer people for that context. So things have really changed, and post-retirement's moving now really front and centre for a lot of super funds. But no one's really got an answer to the question, I don't think. And I think the guts of that problem is that people haven't thought hard enough about what is the real problem they're solving. There's a lot of products out there which perceive to solve something, but they haven't really worked out what am I trying to do here. And this is the real thing in the first slide. There's no doubt that retirement's different from working. At a really simple level, there's no doubt that is the case. One day I might experience that. When you're working, you want to maximise wealth. You've got a long-term investment horizon. And the truth is that most people who are in the accumulation phase don't pay much attention. Maybe toward the end, their members pay a bit of attention, but most of the time, they really just leave it. Leave it with a fund, or don't worry about it too young, and paying off the house, school fees, or what are you doing? So it's a very different world from retirement, whereby people have got much more responsibility for themselves, and the pension, importantly, and the super is a part of their retirement income. The other question is, what's the investment horizon? When you're in accumulation, the investment horizon is long. Long. Even when you're younger, it's too long to really worry about, and when you get middle age, it's sort of still long, but you can't quite get your mind around it. For most people in retirement, the investment horizon is a medium term as well, but people have got no context of how to try and work that question out. So really not a solvable problem. And the other bit is they have a decreasing risk tolerance. We all know about that. They have an emotional decreasing risk tolerance. The GFC was a really highlighted example of that, where emotionally they struggled to cope with the downturn in markets. And conceptually they have a declining risk tolerance, as the other speakers will talk about, as the balances grow and the capital losses and drawdowns and no income to replace it. So it's a different world. And the final bit about this is that for most of our members in this room, the age pension is going to be their major retirement vehicle, not the money they've got in super. The age pension, 20 years of the age pension or 30 years indexed to inflation, that's the guts of what their retirement income's going to be. We're a top-up to the age pension, not a replacement for most people in the room. So it's a very different thing, the problem, and how you conceptualise and structure the problem. And some of the people who use this as a replacement of the age pension may have other assets. And then how do you structure a portfolio with all their other assets? Downsizing their home, investment properties, even other liquid investments. So it's a very different problem, and I don't think we really thought hard enough about what is the issues in the problem. Turning to the products, look at them all here. Bonds, annuities, glide paths, variable annuities, balance plans. Are your eyes glazing over? Mine glaze over every time I see all these terms. What are they? Let's run through a few of them. Bonds. Well, why do you want to lock your retirement savings up in something which generates at or less than inflation? Inflation is your biggest risk in retirement. You've got 30 years, it's going to eat away at your savings. That doesn't seem to make any sense. Annuities, well, they feel safe, but they're pretty risky. You've got the inflation risk, and also you've got some sort of implicit credit risk in there as well. Balance plans, well, probably, possibly, maybe not. Balance plans, most people will say will feel too risky for them, particularly if you have an adverse event early in your retirement process. Glide paths, well, where are you taking off from and where are you gliding to? Some glide paths may end up being like a substantial crash. Some you might sort of float around there forever. So there's one size fits all with the glide path. And then you come down to annuities. The interesting question is, for products specifically designed for retirement like annuities, why the take-up is so low. There must be something that people don't like in them. Complex, expensive, all the other aspects. So there's lots of products verging from simple to complex, but how do you know which product works unless you've really analysed what is the problem you're trying to solve? So matching up the product with the problem is the key task. A little bit more on annuities. Limited supply of annuities, expensive, maybe not, hidden credit risk. And then if there's a guarantee in there, the portfolio you're guaranteeing won't really guarantee your current portfolio. They don't really handle property and infrastructure investments particularly well. So how does that work? And then you get variable annuities. They also can be expensive. But the thing you have to watch with the variable annuities is the provider's got control of the investment strategy. So if I'm a provider, what I'd like to do is de-risk the investment strategy, so I have to put less capital against that investment strategy. It's cheaper for me and I make more profit. How do you manage that implicit de-risking the provider will be incentivised to do? They're just quite difficult assets. So to get back to where I started, what is the problem we're trying to solve? I like to describe this as the golden triangle. There's three variables here. Almost in any investment question, there's three variables. There is volatility, there's how much growth you want, and there's how much income you want. For accumulation and post-retirement, we're trying to build a product which fits within this framework. It's easy in accumulation because the three variable problem becomes two. You can't take any income, so income drops away. So then it just becomes a trade-off between growth and volatility. All of the super literature you read is all structured in this term. You know, how much growth do you want? Do you want to get CPI plus 4, plus 3, plus 2? How much volatility can you bear? What's your horizon? And they solve for that. Optimise will solve for that. The problem is in post-retirement, all three variables are operating and the income one's the most important. You might say that for accumulation, maybe the growth one's the most important and you make the other two quite subsidiary. Here in retirement, the income one's the most important. So you need to build a product which generates income. But it also has to deliver growth because people are investing for a long, long time. And you can't have too much volatility. And the truth is, if you go back to that earlier slide of all those different options I put up, none of those products solve for all three variables. That's why it's in such a mess. But hopefully, the next two gentlemen to follow will be able to solve that problem for us.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, I don't know about an alter ego. This is exactly what I'm going to look like in 15 to 20 years' time. What I want to do today is to take a slightly different tack. As Craig mentioned, we're sitting here in 2025, 2030, looking back on what decisions we took 15 odd years ago that meant that we've become one of the biggest post-retirement income stream providers in the marketplace today. And there's three things I want to kind of start with as thought pieces as we go through this. Firstly, the future is inherently unpredictable. Who would have thought that 15 or 20 years ago, my 72-year-old mother would not buy paperback books anymore? She'd be sitting at home reading them on a thin piece of glass and aluminium. Most of our shopping would be done online rather than in bricks and mortar stores. What tends to happen when we think about the future is we all expect it to change much more quickly in the short term than what it does, but much more slowly over the long term. And we tend to get the reverse of that. So the future is inherently unpredictable, and certainly some of what we're going to talk about today bear in mind that unpredictability of what that future looks like. The second theme, though, is the inverse of that, which is there are certain elements of the future which are extremely predictable. And when we're talking about post-retirement, the one element that we can consider to be very, very predictable is demographics. We know largely what the population is going to look like in 20 years' time because all of those people have been born today. Certainly the ones over 65 have all been born today. So we know pretty clearly what that population demographics are and how they're going to evolve. So we've got unpredictability on one side, but strong predictability on another side. And the third thing, and the thing that I'm most comfortable with, is that in 15 or 20 years' time, if what I'm talking about today is wrong, none of you will remember. If what I'm talking about today has any grain of truth, then I'm going to look like a hero. So it's only upside from here. So let's get started. What was the thing that we had to think about sort of 15, 20 years ago when we built this fantastic post-retirement strategy? And like anything, there was really two key questions we had to ask. Firstly, where are we going to compete? And secondly, how are we going to compete? What part of the market do we want to play in, and how are we going to play in that part of the market? And luckily, from a predictability point of view, which part of the market we're going to play in was pretty obvious. We know looking forward what population growth is going to happen over that next 15 to 20 years. So we knew that the likely proportion of people over the age 65 was going to double over the next 15 years. There's going to be massive growth in that relative to the broader population. So playing in the post-retirement space was going to be an area where there was going to be a strong growth tailwind from the point of view of building a strategy. So we know that, fantastic, it's very predictable. The second thing is the makeup of that group of people. We know we're going to have roughly $1 trillion in assets by 2025, but we also know who's going to own those assets. Those assets are largely going to be owned by the people today that we talk about as the baby boomers. And if most of you sort of turn to your side and look at who's sitting next to you, there's a high probability there's a baby boomer sitting right next to you. And the thing we know about baby boomers is how they behave. We know, largely, that they're all relatively selfish. It's all about me. It's all about spending, consumption. Look at the environment for the last 15 to 20 years. It's all been about consumption. So we know what baby boomers are interested in. We know we're going to have $1 trillion of assets. And we also know that $1 trillion, 91% of those assets were going to belong to those baby boomers who cared about consumption. They don't care about a lot of those other things that, what currently makes up 9% of the post-retirement assets, or in future will make up 9% of the post-retirement assets, and today makes up the biggest proportion. They came from a different generation. They were largely savers, a lot more sort of spendthrift, if you like. The baby boomers, completely different mindset. And so we have to structure ourselves recognising that they're going to make up the biggest part of the population. And what is it that they are interested in? Well, I sort of see there's three broad themes that we have to play to here. Firstly, consumption. As I said, baby boomers, we know what they like. It's all about consumption. And consumption, why do we go into retirement? We go into retirement because we want, to have a long, healthy, fun time when we don't have to work anymore. We want to consume. So consumption and what we do around those consumption preferences is going to be quite important. So in my mind, and this is going to sound like a bit of a theme for a fund manager, and particularly speaking at an investment conference, but things like technology and the finance aspects, I think, are just enablers. They're not going to matter. What's going to matter is making sure that we've got appropriate things in place that take those off the table as decision points. The real decision making is going to be driven by what we can do from a consumption point of view. And in that regard, what are the things I'm most interested in? I'm interested in things that are going to improve my longevity and improve the quality of my longevity. And I'm going to be interested in things like leisure. What can I do? Holidays. I mean, that's what I plan on doing when I retire. I'm spending it. Some of my staff would argue that's what I do while I'm at work. But it's certainly what I plan on doing when I'm in retirement is leisure. So if we can do things that promote those sorts of aspects and the ability of retirees to generate, better health, better longevity, and have more leisure time and better quality leisure, then we're going to be playing to some of the strong behavioural biases. And the other thing, something that's become quite popular over the last 15 years, loyalty programs. I watch the way my parents spend and the number of ways they try and skew their spending to capture some points so they can use those points to generate frequent flyer points and go on holidays and so forth. I mean, it is a real behavioural mindset. That's why those sorts of programs are so popular today. So if behaviourally we can focus on things that are going to improve longevity, give them leisure time, and feed that through in terms of encouraging loyalty, we're on a winner from a consumption point of view. What about the finance aspects? As I said, I think this has to be taken off the table. The problem with, most of the sorts of strategies that we talk about today is they don't deliver what retirees really want. And what they want, and this is something that Mark touched on, is certainty. If we take those sort of silly glide path approaches, which were common 20 years ago, back in 2012, 13, the sort of fixed glide path approaches, they all left you with a sort of a conservative balance type structure at the end of it, large proportion in bonds, smaller portion in equities. The problem with those sorts of approaches is they give you, no real certainty as to the outcome. This chart, that we've got up here just shows you, how long a particular drawdown process would have lasted for under different options. If we run a typical conservative balance, what notionally people sort of think of as low risk, there's enormous volatility in that. If we can deliver something that's far more consistent in terms of just an inflation plus outcome, then we can narrow the consistency of outcomes and generate, much better consistency and certainty for our retirees. And if we just put that another way, in terms of a 90% probability of how long your money is going to last for, even a low-risk conservative balance, sort of the tail of one of these glide path approaches, is only 14 years. Whereas if we could build something that had much lower volatility and was sort of more outcome orientated around CPI plus 3.5, we'd build that out to 23 years. So we need to take that off the table. That's not going to be the decision point. The decision point is going to come back to the behavioural aspects. How do I consume and what do I want to consume? But we need to take the finance aspects off the table by delivering greater certainty. And then from a technology perspective, again, this is just about making life easy. I don't need to know how my iPad works or how my computer works in order to operate it. What I want to know is the efficiency gains that it delivers from. What are the things that we thought retirees would be worried about 20 years ago? We thought they'd be worried about, the time they were spending filling out tax returns and trying to maximise their investment strategy to optimise the pension payments they were getting. So the great thing we did from a technology perspective is we interfaced ourselves directly with Centrelink and the ATO so that the individual's pension stream came straight into the super fund, the tax was all dealt with, it linked into their seniors card, and we just paid them out a lump sum of money which had a high degree of certainty. So what we did was we took those finance and the technology bits, we used technology to make life a lot easier so we could go back to focusing on the bit that really matters to retirees, which is the consumption bit. And if we can deliver on that, or if we thought if we could deliver on that, then we knew we'd be onto a winning strategy. And this is where we also start to go a little bit sort of out of the box. If we started to think about, well, how are we going to do that? Because anyone can go and use their income streams to buy holidays and so forth. So the real sort of brainwave we had 15 years ago was to say, well, how do we lock up that part of the market? How do we deliver something of much better value to all of those retirees that we have in our fund that no one else can deliver? And what we thought was if we could take a 25% blocking stake in a number of companies that played to our core themes around longevity, health and leisure, then we'd be in a fantastic position to, one, stop anyone else from coming in, and two, to provide something of greater benefit to our members. So what we did was we went out and we bought 25% of Sigma Pharmaceuticals, Virgin Australia, Cochlear, Fleetwood, which does caravans, and Ramsay Healthcare. So we've locked up a chunk of this retirement sort of the healthcare leisure market that we're now in a position to offer back to our membership base. And the great thing was 25% stake in those companies, which back in 2013 was worth about $3 billion, relative to our assets today, it's less than 2%, so it's virtually irrelevant. But we've created this fantastic sort of blocking opportunity or blocking space for our competitors, and a great opportunity to maximise the sorts of consumption patterns that we really expect that those baby boomers are going to want to do. And then we use that, points, special offers, access, discounts, all the things that retirees really want, we can provide it. We've got it wrapped up in a one-stop shop. We've taken the finance and the technology bits off the table, so it's really easy for them. And we've got something that provides some real behavioural and consumption benefit to them in the long term. So 3.5 million members in our new fund today. The great thing is that we own these stakes in these leisure and longevity providers. We offer those to our members on the other side. We give them loyalty discounts and points and so forth for accessing those, and that feeds straight back into the bottom line of the companies we own. So everyone's a winner. And who is this fun? Well, back in the old days, we had Aussie Super, we had Host Plus and Cbus. Well, the other great thing we did was we threw all that away and we said, look, it's Oz plus Bus. And I've got the picture of the two retirees walking along the beach, turning to the camera. It's all about us, Oz Plus Bus. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Friends, good afternoon. I was concerned that I may never be invited back to AIST. Last time I was here, I had Geraldine Doog acting as Obi-Wan Kenobi, so I was misbehaving last time, so I'll try and... No, I won't. Today I'm here to talk about post-retirement. It's 2035, and look, for many years, we as a fund seem to have these seamlessly endless debates at the board and Exco about post-retirement income products. In reflection, we had Voltaire's problem. And you know Voltaire's problem, le mieux est le ion du bien. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman. I forgot that you, in this sort of 2013 period, don't have an iCortex. And you haven't had it implanted yet. Now, an iCortex is an Apple product, and essentially it plugs directly into your cortex, allowing for direct brain-computer interfacing. It's an incredible technology. There's two styles available. This is the first style. If you're wondering what a life of peptides leads to, you can have a look at the... Sorry, it's topical. The one I particularly like, many of you know my wife has a PhD in psychology, so the one she particularly likes is this one, where you actually go straight through the frontal lobe and into the cortex to plant messages that we need to talk about. Mr. Chairman, maybe I should get back to Voltaire's problem. Voltaire's problem is that the enemy of the perfect is the enemy of good. The perfect is the enemy of good. And this is the problem we faced as a fund in 2013. So what we decided to do is try and think beyond the silver bullet. Try and think beyond this sort of real need we had as a fund to have the ideal post-retirement product. So the headwinds we faced in 2013 looked something like this: the constant tinkering of retirement incomes policy, the demographic changes that my colleagues have spoken about before. Low risk investments offered low nominal returns and negative real returns for all but the very long horizons. Tragically, and this is the important thing we faced in 2013, is that fiscal death seemed to be developing into a greater risk than physical death. So as we contemplated that, we thought about how do we move away from this silver bullet thinking. And as Mark alluded to, we seem to be having conversations around annuities, stable funds, fixed income funds, managed payout, annuity, all these sorts of things. Please take the bad things away. And what we decided to do is really think clearly at our offsite in 2013 about why so many silver bullets. Why do we keep thinking this way? And these are some of the conclusions we came to: that market, interest rate risk, dynamic correlations, inflation, create an environment where we are simply most of the time just exchanging one risk for another. That's the first frame that was important for our thinking. You know the sort of problems where markets rally to new highs, investors seek more safety, and Mark talked about the glide path problem, and you've heard me talk about this before. When you land a plane, you line it up at an angle of 3 degrees. No pilot in their right mind keeps bringing it down consistently at an angle of 3 degrees. There are wind shears, there are atmospheric conditions. So you need to think about making those adjustments to land the plane safely. We're in the position where we have 1/3 of the retirement savings of all Australians, and we're trying to land tens of millions of glide paths to get an appropriate retirement outcome. So this sort of cycle that we identified in 2013, this sort of exchanging one risk for another, out of growth into inflation protection, sequencing risk, led us to the conclusion that the impacts of this sort of thinking can be catastrophic. So we asked only 3 questions at our 2013 strategy day. So just put your iCortex on for a minute. We asked some questions. What are our core beliefs regarding retirement investing? We asked, what are the biggest differences between the accumulation and retirement phases? And in actual fact, we'll talk more about this, we came to the conclusion that the accumulation phase was largely irrelevant. That in actual fact, our retirement planning starts much, much earlier than we had ever anticipated. And then we asked, what things can we do to nudge our members to take the pressure off investment markets, to remove this kind of silver bullet style of thinking? Okay, so the things that became clear to us is that the search for the silver bullet, the holy grail, is fruitless, that we need a combination of strategies to make our retirement experience for our members work. The fund that wins in 2035 is the fund that can coordinate the product channel, the advice channel, the communications channel, the education channel. We had to very clearly acknowledge that we were sending our members very, very mixed messages. Pot of gold type thinking on the accumulation statement, but then images and marketing of, it was like a dating service, you know, candlelit dinners and long walks along the beach. It was this sort of stuff that we piled out in 2013. How do we think about making the alignment of strategic levers coordinate towards the outcomes? Investment strategies needed to be dynamic, diversified and efficient, but we acknowledged explicitly that they cannot do everything on their own. We had to ask very hard questions about the would it work in Japan test. What would we do if the equity risk premium, say, is zero or negative for some decades to come? And we felt that product design was an underused lever. Unfortunately, we'd all grown up with finance professors teaching us about Markovits and mathematically elegant, optimised solutions. And we decided to take, from that period forward, more of an engineering approach, a risk management, risk failure approach, a more robust approach to the way we thought about the portfolio design. For the engineers here today, no engineer would have a debate about, is this engine perfectly efficient? There would be degrees of efficiency. But in finance, we tend to want to use big optimised models to come up with the answer. And the old water cooler joke, the only thing that went up during the GFC was correlation, right? So you know the gag, right? So when you need it, it's not there. This is some of our thinking that we were doing in terms of thinking about our post-retirement product design in 2013. What we found was that in actual fact, the portfolio size effect, that is, when this largest amount of money is at risk, we had members who were in their late 30s where the investment return was dominating the contribution level. Where the investment return was as large, if not larger, than the contributions being made. In a mature system, there is a Pareto principle in retirement planning design. That is, around about 80% in that last 10 years of the accumulation phase comes from the investment returns and about 20% from contributions. So we needed to think clearly that retirement planning started in a client or a member's 30s. Not 5 years before they retire, not 7 years before they retire, but the point at which the investments started to dominate the contribution level. Then we decided that this outcome was not acceptable. So we did analysis where we took a 25-year-old member in our fund and we had average earnings, average wage growth, and we just took previous 40-year periods to look at if that 40-year period happened again, what would the retirement outcome be? And you can see on the right-hand axis that for many periods historically, we're lucky to even get somewhere near a 15 times retirement wealth ratio. And in 2035, as my colleagues have said, you don't use CPI for inflation. Healthcare costs, aged care costs, the costs of your eye cortex are through the roof. So the CPI is not the number. We need to think about retirement wealth ratios that are more robust. Then when we actually simulated the Donald Rumsfeld moment, the unknown unknowns, to think about, well, what can history tell us about if we have a 70-30 and we have a member going through to the retirement date, you can see that the distribution of outcomes is simply not acceptable. That the sequencing risk becomes so large that you are really, it's a crapshoot in terms of the outcome. So this for us became the DNA of our fund, these kinds of important decisions around how we think about different kinds of risks. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, there's Prof Mike, we love you, had a cool PowerPoint slide, thanks very much. But did this really happen in history? Yes, if you had the 40-year path that ended in 1974, you're in the bottom decile of outcomes. At that point, my friend, we can't help you with the post-retirement outcome. You don't have enough money. If you're fortunate to get a sequence of returns like the end of 2000, you're in the top 10% of possible outcomes. So retirement planning, our product suite, our education program starts in our clients' 30s. So what are the biggest difference in the phases? And I'm not going to go through this too much, Mark really spoke to this, is that the cash flow profile moves obviously from inflows to outflows, but the time frames are shrinking. So the amount of money available for long-term investments also shrinks. So we're trying to think about the liability profile of the cash flows. Equity risk becomes even more risky, and the risk of the permanent loss of capital, maybe mark to market, is relatively more attractive because sure, bonds can fall in value, kinda, but hopefully we get something back at the end. So we're thinking about the reframing of risk in the post-retirement phase. Finally, our trustee board, it was a very big trustee meeting, decided to think through what things can we do to nudge our members to take the pressure off the investment outcome. Increasing contributions obviously is important, but can also have a behavioural impact of reducing future expectations in retirement. We decided to frame our value proposition around retirement income from day one. We removed the term accumulation from our strategy. I have one person nodding who agrees with me. Thank you very much. I'm worried about the feedback now. Anyway, work longer, transition to retirement, lower expectations in retirement, and taking a dynamic, outcome-oriented approach to the asset allocation decision. The others you're doing now. We had to understand, as a fund, certainty equivalence. We had to understand the behavioural finance lessons of today and how they play out in the future. Time is your friend in accumulation. It can be your enemy in retirement. In short, we have asked too much of a single asset allocation for too long. You're all smart people. If I ask you about particular liabilities, you can come up with tailored solutions. But to think about one asset allocation that makes all the bad things goes away, I think that's an enormous challenge. We seem to be, in 2013, fighting non-linear risks with a suite of linear tools. And as you know, as you approach that retirement date or early in the decumulation phase, that path dependency and sequencing is so important. Why is it that we're happy to buy insurance for homes and cars and our health and life and those sorts of things, but we're not able to buy insurance for sequencing and downside risks when the largest amount of money is at play? But that's the insurance problem, isn't it? It's sort of a known cost today for an uncertain future benefit. Anything, my friends, deterministic is risky. Straight lines are risky, and as Mark said, glide paths that tell you 30 years where they're going to be in the future are risky. Yeah, are risky. I've told you my story about going to the US to give that testimony. Isn't it fascinating that target date funds in the US, that 2008 cohort of 2010 target date funds, had a return of +3 to -42%, -33 average, have a big Senate inquiry about it, SEC hearings, and then we'll switch to bonds? Go and do yourself a favour and look at the performance of target date funds who are conservatively moved into bonds. And you see the bond performance. So these members have worn it in the neck twice. They wore it in the GFC with the equities, and now they're wearing it in the neck with bonds because bonds are safe. Anyway, Mark, these are some of your things you'd like to talk about. Right, so what we need to think about is a veritable cachet of weapons. We have to look at the potential risks and understand risks better and pool them better than others. We have a publicly disclosed investment governance budget, and our investment committee agenda is structured specifically around these risks. This is the important one that I'd like to talk more about perhaps in the panel. We find risks that we think we understand better and are more generously rewarded and invest in than anyone else. Let me give you some data on the projections. In 2035, superannuation savings stand at $7 trillion. It will cap at about $11 trillion in 2040. The fund we are running is a $3.7 trillion fund. We are a universal owner. We're not a super fund. We own the economy. Talking about the 13th Australian equities manager on the list doesn't matter. The things that matter are the macro risks. So we as a fund work with regulators and industry to develop macro risk markets in GDP, inflation, systematic risk. We are the largest part of the payment system. Our fund is a multiple of the market cap of the Australian Stock Exchange. It is larger than the combined deposits of all Australian banks. These are the kind of issues that funds thinking long term need to grapple with and start to plan for today. So friends, here is the conclusion. What we want to leave you with is this idea, and get me on my iCortex, michael.drew, doing the best he can. You can contact me there. But in all seriousness, what we wanted to do in this presentation was leave you with 3 questions about structure, strategy, but the important message around thinking through the fact that ultimately this industry is a universal owner. You are the economy. And the kind of risk that you think about investment committees today, segmented into various asset classes, will morph into macro risk. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.